Coming up today on LinkedIn News Live, what are business leaders really thinking about in this post-COVID climate? IBM Institute for Business Value surveyed 3,000 CEOs from nearly 50 countries to understand the mindsets, themes, and challenges leaders are facing today. IBM's senior managing partner tells us what they found. Plus, media mogul Tyler Perry on what inspired him to keep writing, even when his efforts failed. All that next. Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. It's February 23rd, and here's a quick look at the top headlines trending right now on LinkedIn. U.S. COVID-19 death toll hits 500,000. Facebook brokers news deal with Australian regulators, and new PPP rules for small businesses. Let's take a deeper look into that story. For 14 days, starting tomorrow, only businesses with fewer than 20 employees will be allowed to submit applications for the Paycheck Protection Program. The ruling is one of several reforms the Biden administration has made to the program to give more access to the micro firms PPP was meant to aid. Joining us now to discuss is Jordan Dahl. She's small business editor for us here at LinkedIn. Jordan, this change feels like a long time coming. Why is it happening right now? A little bit of a hard time hearing Jordan. Guess we're going to try and rebring her in. Oh, still having a little bit of trouble with Jordan's audio there.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Great.
Great. Sorry about that. As you and I have talked about many times on the show, Caroline, the Paycheck Protection Program had a lot of flaws to it. It was not helping micro businesses, and it was leaving sole proprietors with loans of as little as $1. So these reforms that the Biden administration announced yesterday is really meant to level the playing field and open the Paycheck Protection Program to more of these smaller firms that really need the aid the most.
They certainly need the aid the most. So what are the big changes here when you look at it from a high level?
The biggest change is starting tomorrow, Wednesday, for 14 days, only businesses who have fewer than 20 employees will be able to submit applications. Why does this matter? Because these businesses are, the ones that need the aid the most, but it also means that banks and other lenders will really have no choice but to work with these small businesses. Now, normally these businesses are not that attractive to large financial institutions because the amount that they are seeking is typically not very profitable, or they don't even have a relationship with the actual lender. And so this is really meant to level that playing field and give micro businesses access to these loans.
And when we talk about previous access to these loans, we've discussed that in the past, some of these small businesses have gotten loans that are as small as $1. How is that even possible?
It's pretty crazy. The main reason is that sole proprietors, freelancers, and independent contractors were getting these pitiful loans is the way that their loans were actually calculated. So previously, their PPP loan was based on profit reported in their annual taxes. But if they were unprofitable in 2019, say, they were really out of luck. And that is what left them with $1 loans. Now, under the reforms announced yesterday, that loan calculation has been completely revamped, and it is now going to be calculated based on gross income, including expenses, which means that even if you were unprofitable in the previous year, you are now eligible for these loans.
And speaking of eligibility, these reforms are going to have a big impact on business owners who do have former felony convictions. What can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. That is going to be another really big change coming out. So previously, a business that was 20% owned by an owner who had either a felony conviction for financial fraud, whether they were arrested or convicted, or any felony within the previous year were not eligible. Now, that first requirement related to financial fraud is still in place, but now any owner who has had a felony of any type within the past year is now eligible for these loans.
And Jordan, you got your finger on the pulse about what small business owners are thinking about these reforms. What are you hearing?
There's a lot of excitement, especially from sole proprietors. They have really been left out of this program, and there's not very much other aid available to them. Normally, they do not qualify for unemployment. They can currently apply for unemployment, but as you have talked about on this show, that process is very convoluted. So between not having access to that and not really having access to PPP, there's very little aid left for them to help them keep their businesses afloat. And so this is a really big change for them.
Well, Jordan, I'm seeing tons of small business owners joining us on the stream right now. What do you have to say to them? What do you want them to know about this new program?
If you have not applied, or even if you got your first loan through PPP, go back to your lender in the next 2 weeks, get your documents together, and just see what is available to you. Applying does not mean that you actually have to take the loan, and this goes for the EIDL as well. So it is always worth a conversation with your lender and figuring out what the options are and what that will look like for you.
All right, Jordan, well, thank you for always helping navigate our members through the somewhat complicated process of applying for a PPP loan. We really appreciate you joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
That was Jordan Dahl. She's small business editor for us at LinkedIn. And be sure to follow her for all things small business. And for more stories like these, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. Or if you're in mobile, you can click into that search box. What did it take to be a successful CEO in 2020? It's a question that IBM recently asked 3,000 CEOs across 26 industries, and the answer is quite different than it's been in the past. With the shift to remote work, an overwhelming number of CEOs said that empowering a remote workforce was their top priority in 2020. What does that mean for the future of work moving forward? Joining us now to discuss is IBM Senior Managing Partner, Jesus Montas. Jesus, welcome to LinkedIn News Live.
Hi, Caroline. Great to be here.
So IBM has been doing this research for over 20 years. This remote work, managing and empowering a remote workforce, where did that stand in priorities prior to the pandemic?
Well, it is the highest it has ever been. Before, it wouldn't even make the list. One of the data points that we ask the CEOs is what was their biggest challenge in 2020? And 61% of them said their number one challenge was empowering a remote workforce. Higher than engaging with customers, higher than managing their supply chains, the number one challenge they said for 2020 and going forward is empowering this remote workforce.
And that's huge. And it really hits on this trend of putting the employee first as opposed to perhaps sometimes the customer. What are the best executives doing right now in terms of doing this? It sounds like all buzzwords to me, empowering remote workers.
Yeah, I think two things, what they're doing and what they're yet not doing. So what they're doing is when we ask the CEOs, what is the power of purpose to engage employees? The CEOs of companies that are outperforming financially beat those that they're not by 53%. In other words, 46% of the CEOs basically said purpose is a meaningful tool to engage employees. Only 30% of the CEOs of underperforming companies said that. The second question that we asked them is, would they prioritize people over profit? So would they take actions to benefit employees, even if that would hurt them financially? And the gap is even starker. So twice the amount of CEOs of overperforming companies said that they would do that, a total of 63%, versus the 32% of CEOs of the underperforming companies. So clearly, much more intensity of the correlation of success and caring for employees that we would see in any of these surveys before.
Certainly true. And it just shows you how important it is to put employees first, even if it may hurt your bottom line. I'm going to go ahead and say hello to some members who are joining us in the stream. Jesus, we have Alberto from Portugal, Michelle from New York, Jimmy from Rwanda, and Stephen from New Jersey. We also have Vincenzo from Italy joining us on LinkedIn News Live. We appreciate you joining us. I'm here with Jesus Manta from IBM. We're breaking down the results of a survey they did recently on how CEOs were successful or not in managing the crisis that was 2020. So if you have any questions around what's going on with your business, how employers are thinking about the future for 2021, let us know, and Jesus will get those answered on today's show. Jesus, remote work, it really comes down to flexibility, which is something that employees have been asking executives to prioritize for quite some time now. Why did it take a global pandemic for this to rush up into the ranks of priorities for executives?
Yeah, I think it goes beyond flexibility. I think before the pandemic, I think people would associate remote work to, well, having the opportunity to work remotely or to telecommute. But what the pandemic has done, it has elevated the definition of an anywhere workplace. So it is not only a physical definition, it is also a psychological contract. The contract of the employee with their company is different, and the expectations that the employees have are different as well. So, for example, one of the questions that we ask in one of our surveys is we ask the executives of these companies, do you think you're doing a good job supporting the physical and emotional health of your employees through this remote working period? 80% of the executives said, yeah, we think we're doing a really good job. But when we asked the employees, only 46% of them said that the executives were doing a good job. So there is clearly a disconnect between what the needs as perceived by the employees are and what the executives believe is good enough in order to do that. Now, when you extrapolate this to the CEO study, the CEO study is telling us, we asked the employees of these companies, and we just completed an additional 14,000 interviews for consumers that basically said 1 in 4 employees are looking at changing jobs in 2021 because they don't believe that they're getting the best equation in terms of flexibility and support that they need to go forward in this anywhere workplace.
I actually saw that stat as well, and it rang some alarm bells in my head. That's a critical retention issue for employers. 1 in 4 is not a small number. Are CEOs panicking?
I think CEOs are understanding the issue. I think it's very clear that leadership has been redefined. I think there's, especially the outperforming CEOs, they're very clear that they need to drive more purposeful leadership, that they need to drive more empathetic leadership, and leading companies are really driving a lot more flexibility and support for things like childcare that used to be maybe a bullet point at the bottom of the list of benefits, where now it's at the top. 61% of the employees say that is an essential need that they need in order to continue to do their job, is to get childcare support, for example. So I think the outperforming CEOs are taking action. The underperforming CEOs, I think they're underestimating how big the challenge is.
Well, I just actually want to bring in a comment that I see in the stream right now from Kais. He's saying, I started my current job during the pandemic and immediately started teleworking. It's hard to feel included to organizations, so it is so true that empowering remote workers is critical. To Kais's point, and to what you were just alluding to about the disconnect between CEOs saying, hey, we got our employees covered, and employees saying, no, we do not. These are huge problems, and problems are even harder when we're working from home. How do we bridge that disconnect in terms of not just talking about it, but as you said, making direct actions that are impacting the lives of employees?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is, at the end of the day, one of the positive side effects of the pandemic is the elevation of, environmental, climate, and social issues to be of more importance, as this study confirms. So I think what we will see is role model CEOs, so the CEOs of the outperforming companies are going to take very concrete actions on really creating a better environment for their employees. As I mentioned, one of the statistics that I mentioned before, the people over profit is a very pragmatic decision. Are CEOs willing to, use financial resources to solve this issue? And that 77% of the outperforming CEOs say they will be doing that. So outperforming companies and outperforming CEOs are going to address this. I think the biggest risk is going to be underperforming CEOs, that they just underestimate the issue, and they just think that the anywhere workplace is just providing the ability to telecommute. It is, as I said, it is a different psychology contract. It is a different expectation for employees. And I think those are going to be the ones that are going to be at biggest risk.
Well, you mentioned climate change being a concern for a lot of CEOs moving into 2021, but that's another top concern, according to the report, was regulatory concerns and technology, making CTOs and CIOs some of the most critical C-suite execs CEOs are looking for advice right now. Why is that?
Well, I think because some of these issues are like the environment, social, and governance issues are coming to the top, it is expected that regulation is going to increase. It's also a side effect of the challenges that we have seen on either regulation or lack of it on some aspects of technology, right? So the use of the fear of the use of artificial intelligence for nefarious purposes. I think CEOs are expecting that, on a balanced view, regulation is more likely to increase than decrease, right? Data protection, data privacy, all these issues are elevating the expectation of regulation, and therefore they want to be prepared for that. I think the good side, if the positive side of looking at the climate and the environment, is the CEOs are also seeing that their consumers and their customers are already making that choice. So for companies to be more relevant to their consumers, they really need to take an active role on these areas of environment. And the point that you mentioned on technology, I think the headline is strategy is out and technology is in. The pandemic has made very, very, very personally clear that the percentage of technology across every single industry is going to increase, not decrease. The percentage of technology in each one of our lives is going to increase, not decrease. And therefore, the CIO and CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, is now the number 3 most important role in the eyes of CEOs, is the highest it has ever been in 20 years that we have done these studies.
But what I found so interesting about this study, Jesus, is that as the CTO has taken center stage, some other chief executive officers that in the past CEOs have spent a lot of time with is dropping. Less than 20% believe that the chief human resources officer will play a critical role in the organization. Isn't that counterintuitive to what we were just talking about, empowering a remote workforce? Don't you need people in HR to do that?
I think what it says is the transformation required for the profession of chief human resources that is in front of them. I think what that says is, to the eyes of those CEOs and through their votes, they're seeing the role of CHRO more transactional than actually leadership and talent. And I think that is the transformation challenge. Is CHROs need to elevate themselves to actually be at the forefront of addressing the leadership, the psychological, and the new expectations of the employees, and not just be a transactional head of HR that is just dealing with, if you want, the mechanics of the role.
And then I also found that only 17% of CEOs surveyed ranked diversity and inclusion among the most important organizational attributes for their company, which also surprised me given the year that we have and just the critical focus that we have against creating inclusive organizations. So what's happening there?
Yeah, I think this is one of those examples where the words are ahead of the actions. Clearly when we basically put this in the CEO study, we basically see that outperformers still, the CEOs of outperforming companies, they're 28% more likely to agree that diversity and inclusion behaviors are a central leadership criteria for their companies. So from the point of realization, they believe that this is something that they need to change in their leadership models. The problem is when you actually ask them to rate, their main levers of financial performance and their most important attributes to engage employees. Even the CEOs of outperforming companies, in a list of 13 items, diversity and inclusion is item number 12. So it tells you their actions are still not following their words. We can really see it at pretty much every level. I read another statistic from the board of directors of the S&P 500 companies. Diversity has been a key point for many years in corporate governance in the US. I happen to be one of 34 Hispanic, board members on an S&P 500 company. But the fact of the matter is, while last year 47% of the incoming board of directors were women, so we're making great progress on gender diversity, only 22% were of underrepresented minorities, and that is down 1% from the prior year. So again, the narrative is still ahead of the actions, and the gap is still to make sure that the actions are made connected directly to financial performance, and that's when the change will accelerate.
Yeah, CEOs to make a rank order, and the real actions try to speak louder than the words there, as you're saying. Hey, Jesus, I've told you what I found to be interesting about this report, but IBM's been doing this research for 20 years now. What stood out to you?
I think I think this point of the CIO and the CTO, the Chief Information Officer and Chief Technology Officer, just leaping in importance is a reflection of I think every single industry. I think it was disappointing for me to read the ranking of diversity and inclusion. I think it basically calls for all the work that still we have to do in that point. And it was, I think, the area that surprised me, and it was more positive, was the fact that consumers are voting with their purchasing dollars what matters to them. And we did in the middle of the pandemic, actually, for the holidays in December. We asked consumers, what would they spend more money for environmental safe brands or environmental conscious brands? And interesting enough, 44%, they basically said they would. They would basically, when they buy, they will buy more an environmental friendly brand than a non-environmental friendly brand. And that is just basically the same that it was prior to the pandemic. So even every budget has been stressed and many people don't have a job. They're basically committed to make those choices. And that gives me confidence that CEOs and companies, if they want to be relevant to their consumers, they're going to have to really address not only environment, but climate and the diversity and inclusion issues that we've talked about.
Well, Jesus, last year certainly was a challenging year for CEOs, and it doesn't look like those challenges are letting up, but I appreciate you joining us on LinkedIn News Live to discuss just that.
Thank you, Caroline.
That was Jesus Montas. He's Senior Managing Director at IBM. All right, for our series, Conversations for Change, we had media mogul Tyler Perry sit down with Gayle King to talk about how he got to his journey and his career to become one of the most prolific filmmakers of our day. Take a look.
When did you know that you could make a living by writing? When did you know you could do that?
Well, that's all the Oprah part of my life. It's the early Oprah chapters, I call it.
And who is Oprah? Go ahead, I'm teasing.
Who's Oprah? Oprah Winfrey. You heard her. She had a little talk show. I don't think she's going to amount to much, but yeah.
I know.
But I remember being a kid running home from school to see her show, and there was this woman who looked like she could be a relative of mine. She was talking about all kinds of things on television, and just her whole legacy was up until that point just blew my mind. But there was something that was so profound. One day she said that it was cathartic to write things down. And me being a product of a substandard school system, I didn't know what cathartic meant. I had to go look it up. And then I started writing things down. And a friend of mine, well, because my sisters were in the house, I didn't want them to know what I was writing, so I was using different characters' names. And a friend of mine found those writings, and he said, "Man, this is a really good play." And that was the beginning of me writing, doing plays, going on to television and movies. But that's where it all started.
Yeah, but along the way, while you're doing the plays, it started out, people didn't come, you were sleeping in your car. Did you ever get to the point where you think, writing plays isn't going to work for me, I have to figure out something else? We just thought, this isn't working? Because you went through a time where it didn't work.
Yeah, many times it didn't work. But my mother, I'm telling you, my mother, who loved and adored me at the time, she had no faith in it at all. Again, from where she came from. Hey, what do you mean you're going to do plays? And again, people are going to come. So I did the first show, and nobody showed up, and ended up having my car.
What was the name of the first show?
The first play was called I Know I've Been Changed. It was about adult survivors of child abuse. Yeah. And I put the show up, and I'm thinking, I rented this little theater, 1,200. It was a 200-seat theater, but I was going to do so many shows that it was going to be 1,200 total that were supposed to show up, and only 30 people showed up the whole weekend. Me doing a play on 4th of July weekend, I see what I didn't know. Why are you doing a play on 4th of July weekend? But anyway, didn't work out, but I clearly there was something in me. And this is what I tell people in business. Instinctually, I knew that this is what I was supposed to be doing. Like through faith, through prayer, I knew this thing would not let me go. And I tell people, if you have a dream, if you have something in your life, a business that you're trying to really work and it won't let you go, no matter, whatever you do in however many different directions, it won't let you go, then that is the thing that is your destiny. And for me, that's what it was.
That was Tyler Perry, writer, director, and LinkedIn's guest editor for Conversations for Change. Tomorrow on LinkedIn News Live, the vaccine is here, so now what? Dr. Judith Monroe, president and CEO of the CDC Foundation, joins us to discuss rollout plans and the challenges that lie ahead. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thanks so much for watching LinkedIn News Live.